The bells were tolling for a wedding, but to Eleanor Whitcomb, they sounded like a funeral. She had been awake long before dawn, restless beneath the quilt as the household stirred with muffled footsteps and whispers. Every creak of the floorboards seemed too loud, every flicker of candlelight across a ceiling a reminder of what this day meant. Today she would lose her sister. Today her family's future would be secured. Today the Duke of Ravenscroft would claim a bride. Only, it was not supposed to be her. The discovery came in silence first, then chaos. Eleanor had risen early, half drawn by nerves, half by the faint sense that something was wrong. She padded barefoot across the corridor, intending to peek in on Clarissa, to see if her golden-haired sister was still dreaming of her grand ceremony. Clarissa's chamber door stood ajar. "Clary," Eleanor whispered, knocking gently. She pushed inside. The bed was pristine, untouched. The coverlet smooth. A bridal gown shimmered ghost-like on the chair, the veil draped carelessly over its arm as if tossed there in haste. Eleanor's chest tightened. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, her pulse echoing in her ears. There was no sign of Clarissa, no slippers beneath the bed, no jewels on the vanity, no perfume bottle overturned in haste. But there was a letter. It lay open on the dressing table, ink still fresh, edges smudged as though pressed by hurried fingers. Eleanor reached for it with trembling hands. Her throat was too dry to speak as her eyes raced across the first words. "Forgive me. I cannot." That was all. No explanation. No destination. No apology beyond those pitiful words. The parchment slipped from Eleanor's fingers. "Eleanor." Her mother's voice was shrill enough to pierce bone. Lady Whitcomb swept into the room moments later, her face pale beneath its powder, her eyes wild. Behind her trailed 2 servants, whispering furiously. "Where is she?" her mother demanded. Eleanor tried to answer but found her lips numb. She gestured helplessly to the letter. Lady Whitcomb snatched it up, read it, and let out a cry that rattled the window panes. "Gone," she gasped. "The foolish, selfish girl has ruined us all." She turned on Eleanor with desperation blazing in her eyes. "Do you understand what this means?" Eleanor shook her head, though her stomach had already dropped into her feet. "The Duke," her mother said. "He waits even now. His family, his title, our salvation. Without this union, the Whitcombs are finished. Your father's debts will crush us. Our name will be dragged through the mud. Do you wish to see your brothers turned into beggars? To see your sisters bartered away as governesses?" Each word was a lash, striking deep. But Eleanor's voice cracked. "I cannot marry him. He would see through me in an instant." Lady Whitcomb seized her daughter's shoulders so tightly Eleanor flinched. "You can and you must. You are all we have left." Eleanor's heart raced. She had always been the shadow beside Clarissa's flame, the quiet one, the plain one, the daughter whom suitors overlooked in favor of her sister's beauty. She had resigned herself to spinsterhood long ago, imagining a modest life in obscurity. And yet now her mother was demanding the impossible. "I will be discovered," Eleanor whispered. "When he realizes. Then you will pray he does not." Her mother thrust the ivory gown toward her, the silk whispering like a curse. "Put it on. Every moment wasted brings our downfall closer." The gown's weight landed in Eleanor's arms like chains. The chamber blurred into a flurry of hands and voices. Maids rushed in, fastening pearl buttons down her back, tugging laces until her ribs ached. Powder dusted her cheeks, rouge stained her lips, and still her heart thundered loud enough to drown out every word. She caught her reflection once, pale and trembling beneath the veil. A stranger stared back at her. Not Clarissa, the dazzling bride society expected, but Eleanor, silent, uncertain, trapped. What would you have done, she wondered bitterly, if your family's honor rested on your shoulders, if one lie could save them all? Would you have the courage to say no? Or would you let duty swallow you whole? The ride to the church was a blur of cobblestones and shadows. Eleanor sat rigid in the carriage, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her father sat across from her, lips pressed in a thin line. Not once did he look at her. She wanted to scream, to beg him to call it off, to let her flee as Clarissa had. But the silence between them was heavier than iron. The church spires rose into view, clawing at the pale morning sky. Guests streamed inside, jewels flashing, feathers trembling atop elaborate hats. Carriage wheels ground to a halt, and Eleanor's breath caught as the door swung open. The music began. Step by step, she walked down the aisle, her father's grip like iron on her arm. Every gaze turned toward her, hundreds of eyes piercing through the veil. She felt their whispers like nettles on her skin. And there he was. Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Ravenscroft. He stood at the altar, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in black trimmed with silver. His face was carved in severity, lips unsmiling, eyes as dark as storm clouds. This was not a man easily deceived. This was not a man easily softened. Eleanor's knees weakened, but she forced herself forward. Her father delivered her hand into the Duke's, and she nearly flinched at the heat of his grip. The vows blurred. Words were spoken, repeated, recited as if from far away. Rings slid onto trembling fingers. She hardly remembered speaking at all. And then, the veil was lifted. Alexander's gaze locked on hers. Eleanor braced herself for fury, for recognition, for scorn. Instead, she found only silence, a silence sharper than any accusation. This woman was not the one he remembered. He had danced with Clarissa Whitcomb once, seen her practice smile, her polished charm. This bride's eyes, wide and uncertain, held something raw, something unrefined, something honest. "You are not what I expected," he murmured, his lips brushing her hand. The words sliced through Eleanor like a blade. Did he know? Could he see past the silks and pearls to the trembling shadow beneath? Her breath caught, but she forced her lashes down, hiding the truth behind a mask of submission. The bells tolled again, announcing their union to the world. Guests applauded politely. Flowers rained from the balconies. But inside Eleanor's chest, there was no joy. Only the suffocating weight of the lie she carried. When the carriage bore them away, husband and wife, Eleanor pressed her gloved hands together and stared at the floor. Alexander sat opposite, silent, his eyes unreadable. She had thought the worst part would be the vows. She was wrong. The worst part was this silence, thick with suspicion, heavier with every heartbeat. Outside, bells faded into distance. Inside, Eleanor's secret pressed tighter and tighter against her ribs. She did not know if she feared more the moment he discovered it, or the moment he looked at her again with that same searching gaze, as though he saw something she had never believed existed. Something worth choosing. Would you have stepped into your sister's place, knowing one secret could ruin everything? The carriage rattled across the cobbled road like a drumbeat of doom. Eleanor sat pressed against the corner, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles blanched beneath her gloves. She tried to breathe slowly, evenly, the way she had been taught in moments of high anxiety. But nothing steadied her when she felt the Duke's gaze. He had barely spoken since they'd left the church. His silence filled the space heavier than thunder, louder than the creak of wheels. He sat opposite her, posture perfectly straight, gloved hand resting casually on his knee, but his eyes. Those eyes were knives, sharp and unyielding, fixed on her as though she were a puzzle he intended to dismantle piece by piece. She turned her head toward the window, focusing on the blur of countryside. Fields rolled past, dotted with cottages, their chimneys releasing lazy ribbons of smoke. How simple those lives must be, untouched by scandal, unburdened by veils and lies. Her chest tightened. What would Alexander do when he realized the truth? Would he annul the marriage? Would he destroy her family for deceiving him? The image of her mother's pale, desperate face surged into Eleanor's mind. No, she could not allow that. She would play the part. She had to. The manor appeared at dusk, rising out of the moors like a dark sentinel. Ravenscroft. Eleanor had heard whispers about the Duke's ancestral seat, a fortress of stone, older than memory, perched on cliffs that overlooked the restless sea. It was said no one could tame Ravenscroft, just as no one could tame the man who ruled it. The gates groaned open, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of its towers, their grey silhouettes crowned by crows. Torches flickered along the walls, casting orange light against the gathering mist. The windows glowed faintly, but the house seemed more like a watchful beast than a home. Her heart thudded painfully. She was no duchess. She did not belong here. The grand doors opened as they ascended the stone steps. Servants lined the hall, bowing as the Duke entered, then shifting their gazes curiously toward the veiled woman on his arm. Eleanor forced her chin up, though her body trembled. She felt the weight of their stares, their silent questions. She had always known invisibility in her father's estate, ignored, overlooked. Here, however, her invisibility would not protect her. She was exposed. Every gesture, every word, every slip could betray her. "Your Grace." The butler bowed low. "Welcome home. And welcome, Duchess." The word struck Eleanor like a blow. Duchess. She wanted to laugh, or weep, or run. Instead, she inclined her head faintly, hiding her fear beneath layers of practiced composure. Their arrival was followed by a formal supper. A long oak table stretched across the cavernous dining hall, polished to a sheen, lit by chandeliers dripping with crystals. Eleanor sat at Alexander's right, her back stiff, her hands resting carefully on her lap. She had barely eaten all day, yet the sight of roasted pheasant and buttered potatoes turned her stomach. The Duke, too, ate little. He asked after the journey, his voice polite but clipped, his words chosen with precision. She responded softly, careful not to speak too freely. But silence did not mask suspicion. His eyes lingered on her every movement. When she reached for her wine, her hand shook slightly, and his gaze flicked downward, catching the tremor. "I recall Lady Clarissa as a confident conversationalist," he remarked suddenly, his tone smooth, deliberate. Eleanor's heart skipped. Her spoon clattered faintly against her plate. I prefer to listen more than speak, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady only because she forced it to be. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So it would seem." Her pulse raced. She dared not meet his eyes again. Later, when the guests and attendants had dispersed, Eleanor was shown to her chambers. "These rooms are yours, my lady," said Anna, the young maid assigned to her. Anna was slight, with kind eyes and a manner that hinted at loyalty beyond duty. She curtsied deeply, then helped Eleanor out of the heavy gown and into a night robe. Eleanor collapsed into the chair by the hearth, her limbs trembling from exhaustion. Anna hesitated, then spoke gently. "If I may, Duchess, you need not fear. Ravenscroft may be stern, but the household will serve you faithfully." Eleanor blinked at her, startled by the kindness. A lump rose in her throat. "Thank you, Anna." The maid smiled faintly, as though she saw the truth Eleanor wished so desperately to hide, that she was terrified, out of place, and utterly alone. The days that followed were a study in unease. Ravenscroft Manor was a world unto itself. Its halls were lined with portraits of stern ancestors, their eyes watching Eleanor with disapproval. The gardens, though vast, were overgrown, their wildness reflecting the Duke's neglect, or perhaps his refusal to care for anything that could betray him. And always, Alexander watched. He was courteous, but there was steel beneath his politeness. At breakfast, his gaze lingered when she stumbled over a fork. At dinner, his brow furrowed when her laughter came too softly, too untrained. He said little, yet every silence pressed like a hand against her throat. It was as though he were cataloguing her differences, tallying them against the woman he had expected. One evening, as Eleanor sat by the window of her chamber, embroidering to steady her nerves, she heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The door opened without a knock. Alexander entered. Her heart jolted. She rose to curtsy, but his raised hand stopped her. "There is no need for ceremony," he said quietly. His eyes flicked to her work. "You embroider." Eleanor nodded, unsure of his intent. "I recall Lady Clarissa once declaring such tasks beneath her." The words hung between them like a blade. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I find it soothing," she murmured. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room, shadows stretching across the walls. "You are not what I expected," he said again, softer this time. Her breath caught. Did he know? Did he suspect? She forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were unreadable, but something flickered there, curiosity, perhaps, or challenge. Eleanor's pulse hammered. She wanted to confess, to plead for mercy, to tell him she was not the woman he thought. But her mother's voice rang in her head. "Do you wish for your family's ruin?" So she said nothing. Alexander lingered a moment longer, then turned, leaving the chamber with the same silence in which he had entered. If the Duke was suspicion embodied, then his cousin Lord Edwin was contempt given voice. He appeared days later, sweeping into Ravenscroft with a smirk that made Eleanor's skin crawl. Younger than Alexander, with sharp cheekbones and mocking eyes, Edwin bowed with exaggerated flourish when introduced to her. "So this is the Duchess," he said, his tone oozing false courtesy. "I had heard tales of Lady Clarissa's beauty. But I must say, you are a surprise." Eleanor stiffened, her face warming. "You honor me, my lord," she replied carefully. Alexander's eyes flicked sharply to Edwin, a silent warning. But Edwin only smiled wider, as if savoring the unspoken tension. Eleanor sensed then that he would be dangerous. Perhaps not directly, but as a voice whispering in society's ear, a snake in the grass ready to strike. Still, not every face in Ravenscroft was hostile. Anna, true to her first impression, proved to be an anchor. She fetched Eleanor's letters, shared quiet gossip from the servants, and offered small, steady reassurances. One night, when Eleanor confessed she felt like an intruder in her own life, Anna clasped her hand. "A duchess is not made by birth or gowns," she said softly. "She is made by courage. And I see courage in you." Eleanor nearly wept at the words. For the first time since the veil had been lifted, she felt a glimmer of strength. But the shadows never left. Every ballroom, every supper, every polite gathering was a gauntlet of scrutiny. Whispers swirled. "The Duchess is quieter than expected, less polished, less radiant." Eleanor smiled when she had to, but each smile felt like glass cracking. At night, when she was alone, she replayed Alexander's words in her mind. "You are not what I expected." The sentence haunted her. It terrified her. And yet, in some hidden, secret part of her soul, it thrilled her too. Because if she was not what he expected, then perhaps, just perhaps, she might be something more. What would you have done in Eleanor's place? Confess the truth, or guard the secret with your life? The summons came sooner than Eleanor expected. 3 days after her arrival at Ravenscroft, Alexander announced they would attend their first public appearance as husband and wife, a reception in London, hosted by the Earl of Norwood. Eleanor's stomach dropped at the news. The ballroom. Society. Faces she knew well, faces that knew Clarissa better. Faces sharp with memory and gossip. She had been invisible before, tolerated only as Clarissa's quieter sister. But now? Now she would stand at the Duke of Ravenscroft's side, every eye fixed upon her. She almost protested. But one look at Alexander's expression silenced her. His tone was polite, but his gaze dared her to refuse. The hours before the ball passed in a haze of lace, pins, and whispered instructions. Anna's hands were gentle as she dressed Eleanor in a gown of deep sapphire silk. The color startled her. It was bold, far from the soft pastels Clarissa had favored. "You look radiant, my lady," Anna whispered as she fastened the final clasp. Eleanor swallowed. Radiant? No. Terrified. The carriage rolled into London under pale moon, wheels crunching over cobblestones. Eleanor sat stiffly, her gloved hands folded tight, while Alexander watched her in silence. "You need not be afraid," he said at last, his tone unreadable. Her lips parted. "Do I appear afraid?" His eyes lingered on her face, and she flushed. "Yes," he said simply. The word struck her harder than she expected. She turned away, staring out the window at the glow of the city. The Earl of Norwood's ballroom glittered with chandeliers and silk. Music swelled, laughter rippled, and the perfume of roses mingled with wine and wax. At the top of the stairs, Alexander extended his arm. "Shall we, Duchess?" Eleanor hesitated only a heartbeat before resting her hand on his sleeve. Together, they descended. A hush fell. Dozens of eyes turned. Whispers surged like waves. "The Duke's bride. Not what I imagined. Is that truly Lady Clarissa? She seems different." Eleanor's throat tightened. She forced her chin higher, though her steps trembled. Introductions blurred. Nobles curtsied, men bowed, compliments were exchanged. But Eleanor felt each gaze pierce her like a blade. And then it happened. During a strained conversation with the Countess of Wycliffe, an acid-tongued matron known for gossip, the Countess made a sharp remark about duty. "Surely you agree, Duchess," she said sweetly, "that a wife's first task is obedience. A lady who speaks too boldly soon finds herself unwelcome in society." Eleanor froze. Clarissa would have laughed, fluttered her fan, agreed. But Eleanor's mouth betrayed her. "I should think," she said, voice clear, "that obedience without thought makes a wife a servant, not a partner. And I believe the Duke of Ravenscroft would prefer a partner." Gasps. The Countess's eyes widened. A hush swept through the circle. Alexander turned his head sharply, his gaze on Eleanor. For one horrible moment, Eleanor thought she had destroyed everything. But then, Alexander's lips twitched, just barely, as though fighting a smile. The conversation shifted. The crowd leaned closer, curiosity piqued. And for the first time that evening, Eleanor felt something other than fear. She felt power. Later, as the orchestra swelled, Alexander led her onto the dance floor. His hand rested at her back, his touch firm. "You surprise them," he murmured. Her breath caught. "Forgive me. I should not have spoken so boldly." "On the contrary," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "You spoke as though you believed it." Their bodies moved in rhythm, steps gliding, skirts swirling. Heat spread where his hand lingered against her spine. "Do you," he asked softly, "believe it? That I would prefer a partner?" Eleanor's heart raced. She swallowed. I do not know what you prefer, Your Grace." His gaze burned into hers. "Then perhaps you should learn." The dance ended, but the fire lingered. Eleanor's cheeks flushed as she slipped away to the refreshment table, her pulse fluttering. What was happening? She had come expecting suspicion, scorn. Instead, she had found something else. But her relief was short-lived. Across the ballroom, a group of ladies whispered behind their fans, their eyes darting toward her. And among them was Lady Margaret, one of Clarissa's closest acquaintances. "Strange," Margaret said loudly enough to carry. "I could have sworn Lady Clarissa despised embroidery. And yet I hear the Duchess spends hours with her needle." Laughter. Eleanor's stomach twisted. She excused herself, slipping into the hall for air. The corridor was quiet, but not empty. Alexander followed. "You handled them well," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Though Lady Margaret seems confused." Eleanor's hands tightened in her skirts. "Confused?" "She implied you are not the woman she remembers." Her pulse raced. People's memories can be fickle." Alexander stepped closer. His shadow fell over her, his presence overwhelming. "Memories can be fickle," he said softly. "But I am not. And I recall Lady Clarissa very clearly. You are not her." The words struck like lightning. Eleanor's breath caught. "I do not lie to me," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You are different. Not polished. Not practiced. You challenge me instead of placating me. You look at me as though I am a man, not merely a title." His gaze burned. "Who are you?" Her heart pounded, her throat dry. She wanted to confess, to beg, to explain. But fear sealed her lips. So she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Finally, Alexander leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "I will uncover who you truly are." Eleanor's knees weakened as he turned and strode back into the ballroom, leaving her trembling in the shadows. She pressed her hands to her chest, fighting to breathe. Her secret was unraveling. And yet, beneath the terror, another truth took root, wild and reckless. She wanted him to know her. The days after the Norwood ball unfolded in ways Eleanor had not expected. She had braced herself for anger, for Alexander to confront her before the household, for whispers of annulment or disgrace. Instead, he said little. Too little. He was polite, courteous even, but beneath every word she felt the sharp edge of unspoken questions. He did not accuse her openly. He did not shame her. He simply watched, observed, waited, and in that silence, Eleanor's fear twisted into something more dangerous. Curiosity. Their next journey came sooner than she hoped. Another invitation, another expectation to appear together, another test before society's eyes. The carriage jolted over the uneven road, lanterns swaying, shadows playing across the walls. Eleanor sat opposite the Duke, the space between them thick with unspoken tension. "Tell me," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why did you speak as you did to the Countess?" Her stomach clenched. "You disapproved." "On the contrary," he replied, his voice smooth. "I was intrigued." Eleanor's breath caught. His eyes lingered, steady and unyielding. She forced herself to look away, staring at the blur of moonlit trees. "I spoke what I believed," she whispered. "Should I have pretended otherwise?" He leaned forward slightly, shadows carving his cheekbones into sharper lines. "Most women do." Her heart pounded. She should have been careful, cautious, deferential. Instead, the words slipped free. "Then perhaps you married the wrong woman." The carriage jolted to a halt, but the silence that followed was sharper still. Alexander's gaze pinned her like a hawk's. "I am beginning to suspect," he murmured, "that I married a woman I do not know at all." Back at Ravenscroft, their lives became entangled in ways Eleanor could not escape. Meals shared across a long table, the scrape of silver on porcelain echoing louder than conversation. Walks through overgrown gardens where silence pressed between them until one of them broke it with sharp words or sharper truths. Eleanor tried to keep her distance. But the house conspired against her. One afternoon, a storm forced her to remain in the library. She sat curled in the corner, a book open in her lap, when Alexander entered. He did not notice her at first. He strode to the shelves, pulled down a volume, and turned a page with a distracted frown. The storm roared outside, thunder shaking the windows. When his gaze finally caught hers, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Amusement. A spark she dared not name. "You read?" he asked. The corner of her mouth lifted despite her fear. "Do you find that shocking?" "I find it unusual." His tone softened, a rare warmth breaking through. "Most women I've known care more for gowns than words." "Then you've known the wrong women," she replied before she could stop herself. Silence stretched. The thunder rumbled again, but this time it seemed distant. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her, his scent of musk and bergamot filling the air. "You are not what I expected," he said again, softer this time. Eleanor's pulse raced. She lowered her gaze to the book, desperate to break the spell. But when his fingers brushed the spine of the volume she held, she nearly gasped. It was nothing more than a touch. A fleeting brush of leather against leather, glove against fabric. Yet it burned. Society demanded appearances, and soon enough, another ball beckoned. Eleanor dreaded it, yet the thought of standing beside Alexander again sent a thrill through her veins. The ballroom glittered. Couples swirled. Music swelled. Alexander extended his hand. "Dance with me." Her breath caught. She placed her hand in his, and they moved together into the crowd. This was not the stiff, polite waltz of duty. His hand lingered firmly at her back, guiding her. His gaze held hers, unrelenting, as though the rest of the room ceased to exist. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the violins. "What is it you fear most?" Her throat tightened. The truth clawed at her, desperate to be spoken. "That you will discover who I am. That you will cast me aside. That I will always be second best." But she only whispered, "Failure." His hand pressed more firmly at her back. "And what is it you want?" Her lips parted. Her pulse thundered. The music swelled. She wanted so many things she could not name aloud. To be chosen. To be seen. To belong. "I do not know," she whispered. For a moment, she thought he might pull her closer. For a moment, she thought she saw the flicker of desire in his eyes. But then the dance ended, and the spell broke. It was late when Eleanor returned to her chambers, her head spinning from music, wine, and the Duke's closeness. She collapsed onto the chair by the hearth, pressing her hands to her chest. She could not go on like this. The lie pressed tighter each day. His suspicion grew sharper. And her heart, her foolish, reckless heart, betrayed her with every glance, every touch. A knock startled her. Anna entered, pale, clutching a sealed note. "This was delivered for you, my lady." Eleanor frowned, breaking the wax. Her eyes scanned the words, and her blood ran cold. "Enjoy my husband while you can." The signature, written in her sister's bold, elegant hand, was unmistakable. Clarissa had returned. Eleanor's breath hitched. The room spun. Her sister knew. Her sister was here. And if Clarissa intended to reclaim what she had abandoned, Eleanor's fragile world would shatter in an instant. Eleanor barely slept. The words of her sister's letter haunted her long after Anna extinguished the lamps. "Enjoy my husband while you can." She had turned the parchment over and over, her hands trembling, her chest aching with dread. Clarissa had returned. Clarissa knew. Morning came cold and grey. Eleanor dressed in silence, her reflection pale beneath the Duchess's jewels. At breakfast, Alexander noticed her unease. "You look unwell," he remarked, eyes narrowed. She forced a smile. "It is nothing." But it was not nothing. It was everything. Days passed. Clarissa's shadow lingered in every corridor. Eleanor expected her sister to appear at any moment, at the gates, at a ball, at her chamber door. And all the while, Alexander watched. He grew sharper, more probing. His questions lingered too long. His gaze cut too deep. Eleanor knew she could not keep her secret much longer. The tension finally snapped one evening. They were in the library again, storm clouds gathering beyond the windows. Eleanor sat at the desk, feigning interest in a book, when the door opened. Alexander entered, silent as ever, but his eyes blazed with purpose. He closed the door behind him. Eleanor's breath caught. She rose, curtsied. "Your Grace." He strode closer, stopping only when he loomed over her. His voice was low, dangerous. "Enough." Her heart thudded. "Enough." "Do not play innocent with me," he said sharply. "You are not Lady Clarissa. You have never been her. Who are you?" Eleanor's knees weakened. She clutched the desk for support. "I do not lie." His hand slammed against the desk, inches from hers. She flinched at the sound. "Every day since our vows, you've betrayed yourself." The way you speak. The way you carry yourself. The woman I was promised was polished, practiced, false. You are none of those things. Eleanor's throat tightened. Her secret burned within her, desperate to spill. But fear chained her tongue. Tell me, Alexander pressed, his voice softer now, but far more dangerous. Tell me the truth. Tears blurred her vision. Her chest heaved. And then, before she could stop herself, the words broke free. I am Eleanor, she whispered. Clarissa's sister. Silence thundered. Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with fury and disbelief. Her sister. Yes. Her voice cracked. She ran away on the morning of the wedding. My mother begged me, no, demanded, that I take her place. If the marriage failed, our family would be ruined. Our debts, our shame, our name, everything would have been destroyed. So I. She faltered, shaking. I wore the gown. I spoke the vows. I lied. Her body trembled as though she stood before the gallows. I never wanted your title. I never wanted this deceit. I only wanted to protect them. Alexander's fists clenched at his sides. He turned away, pacing the room like a caged beast. My God. His voice was ragged, harsher than she had ever heard. Do you have any idea what you've done? What scandal this would unleash if it were known? The Whitcombes have made a fool of me, a mockery before all of England. Eleanor's tears spilled. I am sorry. He spun back toward her, eyes blazing. Sorry? You think apologies mend betrayal? You trapped me in a lie, Duchess, or should I even call you that? The word struck her like a blow. Her chest heaved. She could not breathe. I never meant to deceive you, she whispered. I only wanted to keep my family safe. For a long moment, silence reigned. The storm outside cracked, thunder echoing the fury within. But then, something shifted. Alexander's shoulders slumped, his breath uneven. His voice softened, bitter but raw. Do you think I do not know what betrayal feels like? Eleanor blinked through tears. What do you mean? His jaw tightened. His gaze turned inward, haunted. Years ago, he said quietly, there was a woman. She swore affection. She swore devotion. And when I believed her, when I lowered my guard, she revealed herself for what she was. She wanted my title, my fortune, nothing more. She left me broken, humiliated. Since then, I vowed never to trust. Never to be made a fool again. His eyes met hers, fierce and vulnerable all at once. And now you. Another lie. Another woman who deceives. Eleanor's heart ached. I am not her, she whispered. I never sought you. I never sought your fortune. I only sought to keep my family from ruin. Silence stretched. The storm roared. And then, Alexander stepped closer. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle. Eleanor froze, her breath shallow, her skin burning beneath his fingers. Damn you, he whispered, his voice ragged. Why do I believe you? Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time, they were not only of fear. Something else stirred, something wild, reckless, dangerous. Their eyes locked. The air between them thickened. For a heartbeat, Eleanor thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to. Desperately. But he pulled back, breaking the spell. I should expose you, Alexander said hoarsely, pacing away. I should annul this farce and cast you out. Eleanor's chest caved. If you do, my family. His hand cut the air sharply. I will not. Not yet. Her breath hitched. You will remain here, he continued, voice low, commanding. You will remain my Duchess, for appearance's sake. But know this, I will decide whether you deserve that title. Eleanor's heart pounded. Relief warred with despair. Yes, Your Grace, she whispered. But even as she lowered her gaze, she felt something unexpected flicker between them, an ember of understanding. He had seen her secret, her shame. She had glimpsed his scars. And for the first time, the distance between them did not feel insurmountable. Days later, the ember was nearly extinguished. It happened during an afternoon call. Eleanor was in the drawing room, pouring tea for a visiting baroness, when the doors opened. Gasps filled the air. Clarissa entered. She was radiant as ever, her golden hair gleaming, her smile practiced and cruel. She wore traveling silks as though she had never fled, as though she had never abandoned her vows. "Dearest sister," Clarissa purred, her eyes locking on Eleanor. "Did you think you could keep my place forever?" The teacup slipped from Eleanor's fingers, shattering on the carpet. And across the room, Alexander rose to his full height, his face darkening like the storm that had yet to break. The drawing room had never felt so small, so suffocating. Clarissa's presence filled every corner, every breath of air. She stood as if she had never vanished, as if the vows and the gown had always been hers. Her smile gleamed like polished steel as whispers rippled through the assembled guests. Eleanor could not breathe. She clutched the edge of the table, porcelain shards still glinting from the teacup she had dropped. "My Lord Duke," Clarissa said sweetly, curtsying low. "Forgive my absence. Circumstances tore me away, but now I have returned to claim my rightful place." The audacity stole the room's air. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the sisters, sensing scandal thick in the air. Alexander's face was carved from stone. His gaze burned into Clarissa, but when it flicked briefly to Eleanor, her stomach sank. For in his eyes she saw not reassurance, not protection, but doubt. Eleanor's shame roared. Heat prickled her skin, her heart thundering. She wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth, to hurl her sister's betrayal into the light. But the words lodged in her throat. One confession, and society would shred her to ribbons. From that moment, everything changed. The days that followed spiraled into torment. Clarissa insinuated herself into Ravenscroft's halls, smiling at the servants, charming visiting nobles, weaving her poison with every word. Lord Edwin attached himself quickly to her side, his sharp tongue dripping with mockery. Together, they made a formidable pair, beauty and venom, whisper and blade. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Eleanor heard them first in hushed voices that trailed behind her as she walked the halls of London's gatherings. The Duchess is not the Duchess at all. She is a fraud. A pale substitute. An impostor hiding beneath stolen pearls. Her steps grew heavier with each whisper. Every ballroom turned hostile, every supper a gauntlet of scrutiny. She tried to hold her head high, to smile when custom demanded, but inside she was breaking. Alexander did not help. He had not exposed her, yet, but neither did he stand at her side as he once had. His silence grew colder, his distance wider. He no longer met her eyes in crowded rooms. No longer lingered by her side in the carriage. At night, when the manor was still, she heard his footsteps pacing elsewhere, never toward her chamber. The absence carved deeper wounds than anger could have. She had survived fury, but indifference? That was unbearable. One evening, Eleanor found herself alone in the great hall, shadows stretching long across the stone floor. She stared up at the portraits of past duchesses, their faces proud, their gowns gleaming, their painted eyes full of certainty. She had never felt so unworthy. "I was never meant to wear this crown," she whispered to herself. Her voice cracked. "I was never meant to be chosen." Anna found her there, tears staining her cheeks. The maid knelt beside her, gripping her hand tightly. "You are stronger than you know, my lady," Anna said fiercely. "They see only what they wish. But I have seen the truth. You are more Duchess than Clarissa could ever dream." Eleanor shook her head. "It does not matter what I am. It matters what the world believes. And they believe her." Anna's eyes shone with sympathy. "Then you must show them. Not with gowns or titles, but with your heart." But Eleanor had little heart left to show. The breaking point came at a gala, hosted by a marquis whose halls glittered with candlelight and gossip. Eleanor had dressed with care, sapphire silk and pearls, her spine straight though her stomach churned. She entered on Alexander's arm, but he might as well have been carved from stone. He spoke little, his hand resting on hers only for propriety's sake. Across the room, Clarissa shone like the sun. She laughed, she danced, she charmed. Edwin hovered near, fanning her flames. And then, before the entire company, Clarissa let her voice carry. "It is strange, is it not?" she said, smiling sweetly at a cluster of ladies. "How my dear sister so suddenly found herself Duchess. Almost as if fate had confused us. Almost as if the wrong woman wore the veil." Laughter rippled, sharp as knives. Faces turned. Eyes fixed on Eleanor, measuring, doubting. Eleanor's cheeks burned. Her breath faltered. She forced a brittle smile, but her hands shook. Across the room, Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Nothing. The silence damned her more than words ever could. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her chamber, the note from Clarissa still hidden in her drawer, its threat pulsing like a wound. She pulled out paper and ink, her hands trembling. "Forgive me for never being enough," she wrote. The tears came fast, blurring the words. She pressed her face into her hands, her shoulders shaking with the weight of despair. She loved him. She could no longer deny it. Somewhere between the veil and the vow, the suspicion and the touch, her heart had betrayed her. She loved Alexander. And he would never truly love her. Not when Clarissa stood radiant in the doorway, not when society whispered, not when every doubt pointed to Eleanor's unworthiness. She folded the letter with shaking fingers, sealing it with wax. It was all she had left to give, an apology, a goodbye. When dawn came, she rose without hesitation. She dressed simply, discarded the jewels that weighed her down, and gathered what little she could carry. Anna begged her to stay, but Eleanor only shook her head. "I cannot remain where I am not wanted," she whispered. "Better to leave now, before he casts me aside himself." Anna wept, but helped her pack nonetheless, slipping coins into her purse, pressing a shawl into her arms. By the time the first carriage rattled at the inn's doorstep, Eleanor was gone from Ravenscroft. Behind her, in the cold emptiness of her chamber, the letter lay waiting on the desk. "Forgive me for never being enough." The chamber was quiet when Alexander entered, but something in the air was wrong. He had come to speak with Eleanor, to confront her about her sister's barbs at the gala, to demand why she had held her silence while venomous laughter cut through her dignity. But the chamber was empty. The hearth was cold. The gown she had worn earlier lay draped over the chair as if abandoned mid-motion. His gaze swept the room, sharp and searching. And then he saw it, on the desk, a sealed letter. He hesitated, dread rising like smoke. Slowly, he broke the seal. The words within were short, desperate, written in a trembling hand. "Forgive me for never being enough." Alexander's heart clenched. For a long moment he could not move. The words blurred before his eyes, but not from poor ink or bad light. From something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Panic. He spun from the desk, striding through the corridors like a storm. Servants shrank from his path as he barked questions. Where had she gone? Who had seen her? At last Anna stepped forward, her face pale, eyes red from tears. "She left, Your Grace," the maid whispered. "Before dawn. She said she could not stay where she was not wanted." The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Not wanted. The word struck with cruel accuracy. Had he done that to her? In his silence, in his suspicion, had he left her to believe she was unloved, unwanted, unworthy? His hand tightened around the letter until the parchment crumpled. "Where did she go?" he demanded. Anna swallowed. She took a carriage toward the coaching inn at Barrow's Cross. Alexander did not wait another breath. The stables roared with motion as he mounted his horse. Rain slicked the cobblestones, wind lashing his cloak as he spurred the stallion into the night. Trees blurred past, mud splattering, hooves pounding like his own racing heart. Memories chased him with every stride, Eleanor's defiant wit, her quiet strength, her eyes wide with fear but still meeting his without flinching. She was not polished, not practiced. She was real. And she was gone. He would not lose her. Not like this. At the same time, Eleanor sat huddled at the Barrows Cross Inn, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Rain pattered against the window, the smell of wet hay and smoke heavy in the air. Travellers bustled about, laughing, calling for ale, paying her no mind. It should have been comforting, that invisibility. But her heart ached with each breath. She had left Ravenscroft behind. Left the marble halls, the ballrooms, the suffocating whispers. Left Alexander. Her hands tightened on the mug of tea before her. Why did the thought of him wound her more than all of Clarissa's cruelty? Why did his silence cut deeper than her sister's mockery? Because she loved him. The truth pulsed through her like a confession. She loved him, and she had left him without ever saying the words. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her chest, as though she could still feel the weight of his hand at her back during their dance, the warmth of his fingers brushing hers in the library. Would he even miss her? Or would he be relieved, free at last from the burden of her lie? The door burst open, flung wide by the storm. Eleanor's head jerked up. And there he was. Alexander filled the doorway, rain dripping from his cloak, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes swept the room, fierce and desperate, until they found her. Her breath caught. The mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the floor. He strode toward her, every step certain, unstoppable. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough, raw. She rose unsteadily, her heart pounding. How did you? Did you think I would let you leave me?" His voice cracked. He seized her hands, gripping them tight. "Did you think I would let you vanish into the night, carrying only this?" He pulled the crumpled letter from his cloak, thrusting it before her. Her eyes filled with tears. I could not stay. Clarissa, society, everyone knows I am a fraud. And you never defended me." Pain flashed in his eyes. He cupped her face suddenly, tilting her gaze up to his. "You are not a fraud." Her lips trembled. "I am not the sister you were promised." "No," he said fiercely. "You are better. Do you not see it? You are braver, truer, stronger. You speak to me as no one else dares. You look at me and see not the Duke, but the man. Do you know how rare that is? How impossible?" Her tears spilled. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to every word. But doubt still lingered, sharp as glass. "And yet you withdrew from me. You let them laugh. You let me stand alone." He flinched, guilt searing across his features. "I was a coward. I feared that if I stood by you, I would be made a fool again, as I was before. I thought distance would protect me. But it did not. It only wounded you. And in wounding you, I wounded myself." The words stole her breath. His thumb brushed her tear-stained cheek. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I cannot let you go, Eleanor. Not now. Not ever." Her chest ached with the force of her heartbeat. She searched his eyes, seeing not only the Duke of Ravenscroft, but the man scarred by betrayal, the man reaching for her despite his fear. And before she could think, before reason could intervene, she whispered, "Then don't." He bent his head, and his lips found hers. The kiss was fierce, desperate, years of loneliness and weeks of silence shattering in one blazing touch. She clung to him, her hands tangled in his wet cloak, her tears mixing with rain. The inn fell away, the whispers, the doubts, the lies. There was only him. Only them. When at last they broke apart, breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "We will face them together," he murmured. "Clarissa, Edwin, society, the world, let them try to tear us apart. I will not yield you, Eleanor. Not for crown, not for title, not for anything. Her tears turned to laughter, broken and joyous. She buried her face against his chest, clutching him as though afraid he might vanish. And for the first time since she had donned the veil, she felt something she had never dared hope for. Chosen. Truly, irrevocably chosen. Back at Ravenscroft, Clarissa waited. She paced the drawing room like a predator, her smile sharpened, Edwin at her side. She will not last, Clarissa murmured. Alexander will see reason. He will cast her out and return to me. Edwin smirked. And if he does not? Clarissa's eyes gleamed. Then we will force his hand. But neither noticed the sound of hooves on the gravel outside, or the fire blazing in Alexander's eyes as he rode back with Eleanor at his side. The night of the Ravenscroft winter ball arrived, and with it, the storm Eleanor had dreaded since the morning of her false vows. The manor glittered with lanterns and candlelight, musicians tuning their violins as the first guest swept in, jewels flashing, whispers already filling the corridors. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, her hand trembling on the railing, her sapphire gown shimmering in the light. Alexander approached her side, every inch the Duke, commanding, unreadable. You do not have to be afraid, he said softly, though his gaze remained fixed on the sea of faces below. I am already afraid, she whispered. But I will not run again. His head turned, just slightly, enough for his dark eyes to meet hers. Good. Together, they descended. The room stilled, 100 eyes watching. Society had been waiting for this, hungry for scandal, thirsty for the fall of the so-called Duchess. Clarissa stepped forward like a queen reclaiming her throne. Draped in emerald silk, her beauty was blinding, her smile sharp as glass. Lord Edwin lingered at her side, his smirk promising venom. Dearest guests, Clarissa called out, her voice carrying with the ease of practiced charm. Forgive the intrusion, but I feel compelled to speak a truth that has long been hidden. The Duchess of Ravenscroft is no duchess at all. Gasps tore through the crowd. Fans snapped shut, gentlemen muttered, all eyes swiveling to Eleanor. She felt her body lock, her lungs clench, her vision blur. Clarissa's voice dripped with triumph. It was I who was betrothed to his grace. It was I who should stand at his side tonight. But my sister, plain, unworthy Eleanor, dared to steal my place beneath the veil. She is a fraud. An impostor. And you, my Lord Duke, have been deceived. The silence that followed was crushing, heavy with judgment. Eleanor's chest burned. Her fingers itched to flee, to hide, to vanish. Then Alexander's hand closed over hers. He stepped forward, his voice a blade cutting through the air. Enough. The room hushed instantly. Alexander's gaze swept the crowd, then landed squarely on Clarissa. Yes. It is true that the woman I married is not the one who was promised me. She is not the polished jewel society adored. She is not the shallow diamond my family sought. Murmurs rose, a wave of shock. Clarissa's smile grew triumphant. But Alexander's voice thundered again, fierce and unyielding. She is more. The murmurs faltered. He turned, lifting Eleanor's trembling hand for all to see. Eleanor Whitcomb is the woman I choose. She is the woman who speaks truth when others flatter, who stands with courage when others falter, who dares to look a duke in the eye and see not the title, but the man. She is not a fraud. She is my Duchess. And I will hear no slander against her. The hall erupted in gasps. Clarissa's face blanched, her lips parting in disbelief. Edwin muttered a curse under his breath. Alexander's eyes hardened. You, Lady Clarissa, fled your vows and sought to reclaim what you abandoned. You speak of fraud while standing guilty of cowardice. And you, Edwin, who have long leached from my household, now show your true colors as a schemer and a traitor. You will not find welcome here again. Servants moved, guards stepping closer at Alexander's subtle nod. Edwin paled. Clarissa's voice rose in shrill protest. But the murmurs of society had turned against her now, ripples of disapproval spreading like wildfire. Eleanor stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected ruin, disgrace, humiliation. Instead, Alexander had laid himself bare for her, declared her his choice before the world. He turned back to her, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. "Do you see now? It was never about duty. It was always you." Tears blurred her vision. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat too tight with emotion. The music swelled again, hesitant at first, then strong. Guests, eager to bury scandal beneath spectacle, returned to their dancing. Yet the air was changed. Eyes still watched, but now they carried awe, not contempt. Alexander led Eleanor onto the floor. As he drew her close, his hand steady at her back, she felt the world fall away. The whispers no longer mattered. The lies no longer held power. "You were never second best," he whispered against her hair. "You were always the only one." Eleanor's tears spilled, but they were tears of release, of triumph, of love. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "And you were always the only man I wanted to see me." His lips curved, a rare smile breaking through the iron of his face. "Then let the world see us together." And so they danced, not as Duke and Duchess bound by a bargain, not as liar and betrayed, but as man and woman who had walked through fire and found one another whole. At the edge of the ballroom, Clarissa slipped into the shadows, her reign of beauty crumbling. Edwin stormed out, his exile sealed. Society shifted its gaze, whispers already reshaping into a tale not of scandal, but of devotion, how the Duke of Ravenscroft defied convention and chose the woman who dared to be herself. The chandeliers blazed, the violins soared, and in the center of it all, Eleanor and Alexander moved as one. She had begun this journey trembling beneath a stolen veil. Tonight, she stood unveiled, unashamed, claimed in every sense of the word. And when Alexander bent his head, brushing his lips against her ear, she knew the truth at last. The lie had bound them, but love had made them real. Dawn broke over Ravenscroft with a gentleness Eleanor had not felt in months. The storm had passed, outside and within. The manor, once cold and oppressive, seemed softer now, touched by a warmth she had never dared hope for. She stood at the balcony of her chamber, the sea stretching endlessly before her, the waves crashing like a hymn of renewal. Behind her, Alexander stirred. He had come to her chamber the night of the ball, not in anger or possession, but in quiet devotion. He had sat beside her as she wept, brushed away her tears with steady hands, and held her until exhaustion claimed them both. Now, as the sun gilded the sky, he came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers with the ease of inevitability. "You should rest," he murmured. "I have rested enough," she replied softly. She turned to him, her heart swelling at the sight of him in morning light, stripped of armor, stripped of the Duke's distance. He was only Alexander now, a man who had chosen her. "I am ready to begin." He tilted his head, studying her. "Begin what?" "Everything," she whispered. A silence passed, rich and full, before his lips curved in a rare, unguarded smile. He leaned down, brushing his lips over hers with a tenderness that belied the strength in his frame. Later that day, the house bustled with the aftermath of change. Clarissa was gone, her ambitions shattered, her name whispered with pity rather than envy. Edwin had been stripped of his access, his schemes exposed. Ravenscroft's halls felt lighter without their shadows. Eleanor walked the corridors with Anna at her side, and for the first time, she did not feel like an imposter in borrowed pearls. Servants bowed with respect, not pity. Courtiers whispered admiration rather than suspicion. She was no longer hidden beneath her sister's name. She was Eleanor, Duchess of Ravenscroft. At supper, Alexander took his place at the head of the long table, but when Eleanor entered, he rose, not for society's gaze, not for appearances, but for her. His hand extended, his eyes steady on hers. She took it, her heart trembling with joy. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to shift around them. Invitations poured in, no longer questioning but honoring. The scandal Clarissa had tried to ignite became instead a tale of devotion, the Duke who defied expectation to choose the sister who was never meant to be his bride. Yet Eleanor cared little for gossip now. What mattered was the way Alexander's gaze softened when it fell on her, the way his hand lingered at her back during dances, the way he came to her chamber each night, not out of duty but desire. Their love was not the polished perfection society craved. It was forged from fire, from lies and forgiveness, from wounds laid bare and scars that bound them closer. It was imperfect, and because of that, it was real. One evening, as winter thawed into spring, Eleanor stood with Alexander in the overgrown gardens. The first buds pushed through frost, stubborn and beautiful. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "That it was me, and not her?" Alexander turned to her, his expression fierce. He cupped her face, tilting it up until she could not look away. "I regret only that I did not see you sooner," he said. "That I did not realize from the start you were the wife I needed, the woman I had searched for without knowing it. You were not the Duchess I expected, Eleanor. But you are the only wife I will ever need." Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision, but her smile broke through them. She leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with a love too vast to contain. And as he kissed her beneath the blooming branches, Eleanor knew her story had not ended in deception. It had begun there, yes, beneath a veil and a lie. But it had grown into truth, into courage, into a love that had defied the world. The lie had bound them. The truth had freed them. And love had made them eternal.